For over 40 years, Carroll Shelby's cars have been stunning the world with blistering performance. It didn't matter whether he was at the wheel or commanding a racing team. Shelby was destined to win. But no matter how many cars he's created or races he's won, it's always been about building the next one, better and faster. From his powerful Cobra Roadsters and Coupes to his Cobra-inspired Mustang GT 350s and GT 500s, Carroll Shelby has created an array of incredible cars that are as beautiful as they are fast. Loyal fans know that these cars are meant to be driven, not just admired. That's why you see Shelby cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars racing at the annual Shelby American Convention and other venues. Enhancing the appeal of the car's sheer power is knowing that you're driving something created by one of the true legends of motorsports, Carroll Shelby. Every car he's touched is a testament to his skill at putting together a talented team that knows how to build cars to compete on the world stage. Carroll Shelby's fascination with cars and speed started when he was very young, growing up in Leesburg, Texas.
From my father was a rural mail carrier. He loved cars, and although he grew up before the era of cars, he was a rural mail carrier. He had first thing I remember is a 28 Whippet, and I loved to stand up on the floorboard when we'd go on his mail route and ask him to go faster, Dad.
His father loved Shelby's enthusiasm for speed. He took his son to the races, held on small oval dirt tracks. There, he watched the birth of stock car racing. By the time he was in high school, he couldn't wait to get his license. He dreamed of going fast like his racing idols.
Now, the day I got my license at 14 years old, I've been raising Cain with my dad to get my license. He had a 34 Dodge. I said, "Let me take you to work, Dad." He went to work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 5 o'clock I had a ticket for 80 miles an hour, and I didn't get to drive for 6 months.
After he graduated from high school, he joined the Army Air Corps in 1941. During the Second World War, he trained pilots, tested planes, and flew around the country delivering parts and supplies. In 1945, after the war, Shelby went home to Dallas and searched for his true calling. Cars kept calling his name.
I got out of the Air Force. I was a pilot for 5 years and fiddled around with businesses. I'm not an 8 to 5 guy. I can't be structured. So after 4 or 5 years, I said to myself and my family, I'm going to get into automobiles. It's the only thing that I ever think about all the time anyway. And I started driving sport cars with a friend of mine, Ed Wilkins, in Dallas.
Shelby was tearing up the Texas tracks by the 1950s. His reputation started to grow as a skilled competitor behind the wheel. He didn't earn very much, but it was clear he was meant to race. He had the fixed determination that all champions need. His natural talent, will, and the skills he developed earned win after win. As Shelby started to amass a string of racing victories across the United States, his reputation grew. By 1954, his rising status as a driver secured him a berth on a factory team. This provided him the chance to compete in Europe. Shelby's remarkable skills continued to grow. Out of the 111 sports car races he completed, he won 50 and was named Driver of the Year by a number of magazines. In 1959, Carroll reached the pinnacle of his driving career when he won the fabled 24-hour race at Le Mans. Unfortunately, a heart problem cut his racing days short after that win.
And I didn't drive race cars but about 10 years, but when I finished in 1960, I'd been on nitroglycerin pills for a couple of years with a heart problem. I won the national championship for about the 5th or 6th time, and said, that's it.
Though he'd retired from racing at 31, he wasn't ready to sit on the sidelines. Shelby wanted to build his own sports and racing cars. He first tried to develop an alternative to the Corvette when the president of GM, Ed Cole, gave him a couple of the Chevrolets. GM's engineers were outraged.
I took them to Italy and put aluminum bodies on them. He called me one night and said, Shelby, I never gave you those cars, and found out the chairman of the board had found out, and Zora Duntov and a couple other guys had gotten to the chairman. They didn't want anybody but their GM guys building them, so that was that.
In 1962, another opportunity presented itself when AC Motor Cars of England lost their engine supplier. Shelby had an idea.
Bristol Engine quit building engines. They were using little 120 horsepower Ford V6 in England, so I contacted them, contacted Ford. The Icoca loaned me $25,000 and told the guys to get me out of the office before I bit somebody if I thought I could build a car that could outrun a Corvette.
Thanks to Iacocca, he had the engines, and AC gave him the bodies. He shipped his V8s to England, where 2 prototypes were built. It was time to test the cars. Stuffing Ford's more powerful V8 engine into the lightweight AC transformed the car. It hit 150 miles per hour on its first run. Hoping to enlist Ford's full support for his sports car project, he shipped the prototypes back to the States. They signed on after they saw the car and watched the test footage. Next stop, the New York Auto Show, to introduce the car to the media and the public. The car needed a name before he could publicize it. It came to him one night in a dream. He called it Cobra. By 1963, his Cobra was ready to strike. People loved the car right from the start. It even inspired a songwriter, Carol Connors, to create a pop tune celebrating the Cobra. Kids all over the country dreamed about the Cobra. While kids raced them at home, the real action for the Cobra was on the track. The Cobra Roadsters showed up in races and took on the Corvettes. As Shelby had predicted, his cars were nearly unbeatable. To stay ahead, he upped the ante with a 427 cubic inch engine in 1964. The Cobra was nearly invincible in America, but Shelby wanted to take on the world. It was time to challenge Ferrari in Europe. This was harder than he thought. Ferrari's GTOs were more aerodynamic and better suited to Europe's tracks. Shelby started work on a new car.
We decided to try to go to Europe. We didn't have much money, and Castrol, Goodyear, kicked in some money. Ford kicked in a little. We built the Daytona Coupe, Ken Miles gave up a year of his life trying to make a racehorse out of a mule because it wasn't, you know, it really had to work hard on the aerodynamics. I should have listened to some other companies on the aerodynamics. Ford's Aeroneutronics and Benny Howard, an old friend of mine. If I'd listened to him, we'd have been 6 months ahead.
While the team might have done it faster, the result was stunning. The aerodynamic Cobra Coupe was ready to race in 1964. Its slippery body enabled it to pass the 150 miles per hour limitation of the Cobra Roadster. Its first outing was at Riverside, California, with Ken Miles at the wheel. It bested the track record when Miles saw the speedometer hit 183. The Cobra Coupe was now set for its first race, Daytona. This car led the race for 6 hours as the competition sped around the Daytona Speedway. With only a few laps remaining, the Cobra had to pull off to refuel. A hot break ignited some spilled gasoline, and the car caught fire. One of the crew members was engulfed in flames, but only suffered superficial burns. But that race was over. They refurbished the car and prepared it for the upcoming event at Sebring. They didn't have to worry about fire. The skies blackened and it started to pour. The pits were flooded, and some said it was more like a boat race than a car race. It was sink or swim, and the Cobra Coupe roared to victory. Ford rewarded Shelby by giving him the money he needed to take his cars to Europe. Shelby and his team looked forward to taking on Enzo Ferrari during the 1964 European racing season.
But we went to Europe and made it outrun the Ferrari GTOs, but mainly because of GTO, we had a probably honest 100 horsepower on them if we needed it.
Ferrari withdrew from the GT class, and this left the more powerful Shelby coupes all the room they needed. Shelby won the coveted 1965 World GT Championship. But what to do with the battle-scarred cars? Shelby thought he'd just leave them in Europe.
After we won the World Championship, I started not to even ship them home. You know, used race cars didn't used to be worth much, but there was 6 of them. One of them sold for $6 million the other day, so another stupid Shelby.
No one could have imagined that the cars would be worth millions of dollars one day. Shelby hauled the cars home and sold them to team members and friends for as little as $1,500. You just never know. On the heels of his success with the Cobra and the Cobra Coupe, he was tapped by Ford to help them win Le Mans. He was swept up in a feud between Henry Ford II and Enzo Ferrari that started after Ferrari turned down Ford's offer for his company. Ford had poured millions into his attempt to dethrone Ferrari. Engineers and racing specialists were brought together to create Ford Advanced Vehicles in 1963. They had adapted an existing body from the British firm Lola and put it on a chassis with a Ford V8, an idea similar to Shelby's use of the AC body for his Cobra. The cars stood 40 inches high and were dubbed the GT40s. When they turned up at Le Mans in 1964, they were sidelined with transmission and engine problems. Of 10 races in 1964, they didn't complete any. Henry Ford was not happy. Shelby got a call. Ford didn't care what it cost. He told him to win. After the GT40s were shipped to Los Angeles, the Shelby American crew started work night and day on the cars. It was a major overhaul. Engines, wheels, and tires, everything was tested, and then changed if it didn't look as though it could be the best. Shelby put in the trusty Ford 289 that powered his Cobras. It was hard work, but he knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
There's never been a program like that, and I'm so happy to have been a part of that, because you couldn't have a program like that at General Motors. You couldn't have a program like that anywhere except Ford Motor Company, because Mr. Ford ran Ford Motor Company.
Shelby's revamped GT40s were ready to take on the world at the 1966 Le Mans. It's one of the toughest races in the world. 24 hours of non-stop, high-speed driving tests the cars, the drivers, and the teams. Shelby and Ford knew they passed the test when the GT40s finished first, second, and third. Ferrari had been beaten. This victory made Shelby's legend grow even larger. While he'd helped to vanquish Ferrari in Europe, there was still a domestic foe to conquer. The Chevrolet Corvette was once again in Shelby's sights. Ford had introduced the Mustang in 1964 and set off a buying frenzy. It inspired a string of so-called pony car imitators, but it wasn't a real competitor.
So Icoca called me one day and says, we sure want to make this a sport car. Says, my guys said we couldn't do it. Do you think we can? I said, well, I might.
Shelby assembled a team that tore into the car, putting in a more powerful engine, better brakes, better suspension, and they got rid of excess weight by tearing out the rear seat. The result, the Mustang GT350, or the Shelby Mustang, started to blow the doors off Corvettes all over America. If you couldn't afford to buy one, you could rent one from Hertz Rent-A-Car and go racing, a crazy idea that was a disaster for Hertz right from the start.
They really were race cars that a few nutcases drove on the street. So we delivered the first 200 of them just before January the 1st in New York, and they had a big line of customers backed up. They took those cars, and the next day a big ice storm hit, and 40 of them got totaled. A bunch of them got bent up, and the president of Hertz called me and he says, Shelby, I wish you'd come get these some bitches, because it ain't working, and I'm afraid I'm gonna lose my job.
The GT350 was more than enough car for most people, but Shelby turned up the heat in 1967 when he put a 427 cubic inch engine into his new car, the GT500. These cars have become hot collector's items and still turn heads wherever they're driven. After years of working with Ford, Shelby followed his mentor, Lee Iacocca, to Chrysler. Instead of big muscle cars, he went to work putting some muscle into Dodge's lineup of small cars.
The performance car of the 70s was a 4-cylinder BMW with about 90 horsepower, and I thought, well, if we blow those guys off, we might create a little market here. So we set a target of 3,500 the first year, and we sold 7,500 or 8,500. We wound up with that little engine at our performance center in California, building the GLH that still wins the stock races.
Turning compact cars into high-performance rockets foreshadowed the tuner craze made famous in the film The Fast and the Furious.
The most popular form of motorsport that there is now are these guys in their little pocket rockets. But we built a lot of those things at Chrysler very successfully.
While that was fun, Shelby couldn't turn down the chance to build another high-performance sports car. Chrysler's vice chairman at the time, Bob Lutz, approached him with an idea, the logical follow-up to a Cobra, the Viper.
My job in building the Viper, I'd built one that weighed 2,900 pounds in California with John Fernandez. A bunch of engineers decided to move it back to Chrysler, and it wound up weighing 3,900 pounds when they finished. But we had a sport car.
The truck motor in this 10-cylinder car didn't help to keep the weight down, but it made it fast and powerful. Like every car Shelby has had a hand in, this one got attention. The Viper was a modern hit, but Shelby's Cobras were soaring in value. The baby boomers grew up and started buying their dream cars. If they couldn't afford or find an original Shelby Cobra, they bought replicas. Shelby began to serve this growing demand by offering cars that were as close to the originals as possible. They offered all the fun anyone could ask for, and then some.
This is a Shelby 427 Cobra. It's got the aluminum Shelby engine. We've got 6-bolt mains on 2, 3, and 4 for extra strength, extra webbing in the block. You can bore this thing out to well over 500 cubic inches, and this particular car has a Vortex supercharger. It makes over 700 horsepower and 700 foot-pounds of torque, all at a very reasonable 5,500 streetable RPM. 2,500 pounds, you do the math, explosively fast.
But some longed for something that was closer to the original AC Cobra. In 2004, Shelby struck a deal with AC Cars of England. Once again, he could offer the lightweight AC bodies mated to his powertrain. You could order a car with a classic Ford 289 or something larger. It was up to the buyers to decide how retro they wanted to be. While some were looking back, others thought about what the Cobra of tomorrow would look like. Ford introduced its 600 horsepower, 3,000-pound Vision of the future in January 2004. This concept car was the rage at the Detroit Auto Show. The 81-year-old Shelby took a test drive at the Irwindale Raceway before it was unveiled to the public. Carroll Shelby has become a legend to thousands of fans who come to see him whenever they can. Wherever he goes, he's asked to sign autographs, pose for pictures, and look at the cars he helped to create. It's a phenomenon that keeps growing.
I got an idea it's because there were a hell of a lot of kids in the 60s that loved muscle cars, that were going to school, couldn't afford them, and now they're retired. A lot of them can afford to buy those cars. When I look back, that was great times for me, and maybe they look back and say, God, I want to relive my childhood.
Die-hard fans can relive their childhood dreams at events like the one put on by the Shelby American Automobile Club. Members don't attend just to gawk at pretty cars on a lawn. They bring their cars to race. Whether they own a Mustang GT350, a Cobra Roadster, or a Le Mans-winning Ford GT40, every trip around the track is a reminder of a time when Carroll Shelby's cars ruled the racing world.